Welcome to episode 65 of the Chess Files. The answers are out there. I'm James Eade of the Eade Foundation. The Eade Foundation is trying to build communities through chess. And it doesn't matter what country you live in, what doesn't matter what language you speak. If you play chess, you're part of the chess community. And the Eade Foundation can help you get started if you don't know, you don't have the resources to get started, you don't know how to get started, to form a community wherever you are, wherever you live. It just doesn't matter. Everyone can play chess. So today's episode, the question is what's going on at the Marshall Club? Marshall Chess Club in New York. It's one of the oldest chess clubs in the United States. And I always visit it when I'm in New York City. And I wanted to bring somebody on who knows a little bit about it. And his name is Sal Matera. And Sal, welcome to the Chess Files. The answers are out there.
Nice to be here.
It's so great that you're willing to come on and tell us a little bit about yourself, about what you're doing now. And my producer always bugs me to ask the human interest questions, like where were you born, where'd you grow up, where you live now, and how did you get started in chess? So where'd you grow up? In
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn. My last guest was from Brooklyn. So
who was?
My last guest was from Brooklyn too.
Okay.
I think there's a big connection between Brooklyn and chess for some reason.
Well, you mean like with people like Jack Collins and Bobby Fischer, for example?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And so is that kind of like leading to the next question? Like you live in New York now, right?
Yeah, actually I have two places. I have an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan because I went to Columbia and loved the neighborhood. In 1988, my wife and I bought a house in a little town called High Falls, New York. It's near New Paltz, straight up the thruway. We have a big house here, and particularly I retired in 2015, and then particularly when the pandemic hit, it was like I did not want to be in New York City at all.
Right.
So we've been up here pretty much full time ever since. I'm going to go back to the city, but mostly here.
Is that the Hudson Valley?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I got a general sense of where you are. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pandemic's effect on the Marshall. But you mentioned Jack Collins, and that was the first time that I ever read your name, was in my 7 Chess Prodigies by Jack Collins. So can you tell me a little bit about what it was like then? What the chess world was like? What was it like getting started into the chess world? What were your first kind of experiences in chess?
So a big question. I'll tell you a story to start off with. So I learned chess, and I always said because of my mother's hair. She wanted to go to a beautician. She took me to my aunt's house and left me with my cousin Michael. We had nothing to do. He brought out this board with strange pieces and said, "This is chess," and he taught me the moves. We played 2 or 3 games. Of course, he won every game extremely easily, and he was completely bored. And he said, if you can set up the pieces, we'll play again. And of course, I did the only thing I could do at that point because I had no idea. I just started crying, which got me. I was 7 years old, so it just got him into terrible trouble. And everybody beat him up for upsetting the little kid. And then
it's not the first time someone's cried playing chess.
This is true. But that was when I was crying because I couldn't play.
Right.
So that was a little bit more upsetting. But anyway, what happened is that night, my mother and I went home. My father came in, and it was around Christmas time, and walked in with I didn't know any of this. Walked in with a chess set out of nowhere. He just said, it's probably too much for him. He's too young for this, but I wanted to give it to him, and it was perfect because it had a little book, Chess in 60 Minutes. I learned, and then I went back and I played my cousin and I beat him up.
Cool.
But so I think after a short period of time, my father in particular realized that I really was interested in the game. He also loved Greenwich Village, so we went to a place called Peter's Backyard, which happened to be on West 10th Street between 5th and 6th. And I think you're going to figure out where this is going.
Right.
So we had a nice steak dinner. We walked up the street to look at the neighborhood, and there was this place, 23 West 10th Street, which had a plaque on it that said Marshall Chess Club. My father was not very shy, so he knocked on the door or rang the buzzer or whatever, and we went inside. And immediately on the left, there was something that used to be called the bridge room. And in there were four people, obviously, but two of the people were Arthur Bisgeier and Bill Lombardi. And they were playing bridge, not chess. My father asked them if they could suggest anybody to teach their son. And I think it was Arthur Bisgeier said, "Why don't you call up Chess Review?" Gave us the phone number, Chess Review. A couple of days later, my father calls up Chess Review, gets Jack Patel, who is the postal chess person at Chess Review, and he said, "I have a very close friend called Jack Collins." And my father called him up, and within if it was even a half mile, it was a long way. Jack lived on Lenox Road, even though he'd originally been on Hawthorne Street, which is why his place was called the Hawthorne Chess Club.
Right.
Moved to Lenox Avenue, and we went over there and we sat down, and I was absolutely terrified, about this person who was, a tremendous chess player. And he played me a game or two and decided he wanted to teach me, and said to my father, "I will teach him." And my father said, "How much?" And Jack said, "Nothing." Now, my father was a lower middle class Italian. That was not acceptable. They haggled, they bargained, they went back and forth. And for the princely sum of $3 for a lesson, my father got to at least give Jack some money. Now, you have to understand what a lesson was. I would get there at 1 o'clock. You couldn't get there earlier because Jack slept until 12 every day. I would get my formal lesson. I would learn openings, middle games, end games, go over the games of the great players. That would go for 2 or 3 hours. We'd play some speed chess. I'd be drinking Cokes all day, which was my $3 was used up really fast. And, and then we would stay. Ethel would make dinner. And then the boys would start to come in, which would be potentially the Byrne brothers, Bobby, Lombardi, obviously. Anybody, who's who, Raymond Weinstein, the whole crew.
Right.
So in those days, that was kind of the beginning for me. Jack taught me, I thought very well. I mean, I think he was an excellent teacher. My first tournament was in 1959, a U.S. Amateur Championship in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And I still tell Frank Brady this. There was a book stand set up, and Frank and Kenneth Harkness, I think, were the two TDs, as well as they had a little book concession stand. And I bought a book, a very strangely unknown book called Bobby Fischer's Games of Chess. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Maybe not. I don't know.
It's okay. So the book, it's hard to get. I got a bunch of them. I actually got 2 or 3 of them. What happened was that in 58, I think it was 56 to 57, somewhere in there, Bobby won the U.S. No, it's 57 to 58. Bobby won the U.S. Junior, the U.S. Championship at the age of 15, and qualified to play in the interzonal. What he did is he started working on the book of the 13 games. I think it was a 13 or 14 round tournament, whatever it was. And he annotated all the games, and he wrote this little book, which I think Jack helped him with tremendously, especially with, the grammar and everything else. But it's the first time that Bobby wrote anything. Actually, we'll talk about this later. A part of the Marshall Chess Foundation, I actually have the galleys of that book. But it just was. I'm not sure I was going with this, other than the fact that I think that I very early was, around Fischer and various other people, and he always went over to Jack's place. So I started taking lessons with Jack. I'm sorry, when I was at the U.S. Amateur Championship, the book that I bought from Frank Brady was Bobby Fischer's Games of Chess. Right. So I bought that book from the guy who ultimately wrote the best and most important biographies of Fischer. Right. So Jack very quickly bought me a membership, because we knew we didn't have any money, to the Marshall Chess Club, which is where it really began for me, with the Marshall, being around there. I found it fascinating. I just loved it. And one of the things that we played in then, and nobody knows what you will know, but a lot of people don't know, is the Marshall Chess Club on Tuesday nights had they call them the rapid transit tournaments. You know what those were? So basically, there was a big bell, and every 10 seconds the bell would go off.
Yep.
And you had to make a move. This was before they had, a lot of chess clocks and all that.
You know who told me about that was George Koltanowski.
Did he really?
Yes, he would tell me about ringing the bell, and it was like, that was just kind of, really interesting to me that you could play like that, and but it must have been just what you wanted, uh, being in that environment.
Yeah.
And whether they rang a bell and forced you to move, it just didn't matter.
Yeah, I actually played Herman Helms in one of them. He was close to 90. I was 10, 7, whatever the hell I was.
Yeah.
And he did the classic. This is what the old pros did in the rapid transit. They would basically, the bell would go off and they would hover for a few seconds, and then they would make their move. And now you had 7 seconds to make your move, and they would be all over you.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here, this is the dean of American chess, and I'm a little kid, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't have to do that. He was so much better than me. It was, at that point, it was a joke. So anyway, I just, I did the Marshall, and we know what happened for a long time in those days is that I don't know why that the players would drift back and forth between the Marshall and Manhattan.
Sure.
Just randomly. And the strong players would go to one place, then they would come back to the other, and it was sort of like the ebb and flow of the ocean. I spent a lot of time at the Manhattan. I loved the Manhattan Chess Club also. It didn't have the character, and it didn't have that we were always in the same building like the Marshall was, but it was a good place to play.
Where was it at that point?
Jim, it's been all over the place. It was,
yeah, I know.
I can't remember which one. There was one I think it was the Henry Hudson building, or it was the hotel.
Yeah. I know Walter Shipman was the director of it at one point, and I think that's where it was. But I get very confused, and so you can't trust my memory of what he told me. But
so let me fast forward then. So many years later, this is maybe 15, 20 years later, I went back to the Marshall. And I have a feeling that it had something to do with the Fischer-Spassky match in '72. So in '73, I played in the Marshall Chess Club Championship and I won. So I was the champion.
And you were about 22 at the time?
Yep.
Yeah, because this is I know that you played and defeated George Kramer.
Right.
And this is like one of those guys that I only knew through reading about, and
George.
You actually played him and beat him. So it just is so exciting to me to talk to you about players like that, like Herman Helms. You met him, you played him. And did you ever meet and play Edward Lasker? This is a segue, but
I met him, but no, I never played him.
Oh, okay. Another guy I brought, like Meet the Masters and stuff like that when I was just getting started in chess, and so he would describe these players that he had known when he was a young man, and they just came alive to me, and then to read about, and that's all I knew because I grew up in when I started playing chess, it was in a rural Western Massachusetts, and so I never met anybody until I was an adult. And so that age, though, the 60s in New York City, I had been reading about. And so all of these characters, you were one of them. And you got to play all these guys.
Did you read Asa Hoffman's book?
I did. And I actually had him on my show. And so I have an interview with Asa. And it was the same feeling. Of course, he was the last gamesman. So he talked about backgammon and horse betting and that sort of thing as well, but and he was like telling me about sizing people up. The thing about it, the playing chess on the streets for money was you wanted to know that you were going to play someone you could beat.
Right.
But in those days you knew who was better than you.
True. But it was interesting when I spoke to Asa, I said, so how'd you hustle? Chess is different from backgammon. If somebody beats you in backgammon, you go, it's the dice. Somebody beats you in chess, it took a couple of games in a row, and you go, the guy's too good. And he said to his credit, he said he never hid the fact that he was a strong player. So, but he felt that, if he explained the game to people and, said, this, you should have done this or that, they would keep coming back. So it's kind of a lesson in a sense.
Yeah.
So it was
And
very
you should
cool.
pay for those lessons. That's like your dad thought.
Yep. So I think there were a lot of people, you've got all the names. Bernie Zuckerman was running around. And I remember going to the Rosalimo chess studio on
Right.
same street where I think the Queen's Lisa Lane's place was
Right.
also. They were all down in the village there, one right after the other. And I took a lesson from Rosalimo, and he made, put up some position, and it was a queen sacrifice. I still remember that. Of course, I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
But he was a character, and there were all these characters around. It was a lot of fun. And then at the same time, old Deutschberg was taking over, so we were all playing in the Henry Hudson Hotel again, and all these things.
I played in one tournament there.
Really?
Yeah. And it was like the visit, and I kind of thought I was hot stuff at the time. And then when I played in that tournament, I realized there are guys my age who are better. And it was like a real, I guess I'm not going to be the next Bobby Fischer moment for me.
Well, nobody was.
Right.
Actually, one of my favorite things at the Henry Hudson was that the U.S. Championship was held there. And I think I was 15 or 16 years old. I was a decent player at that point. But unlike what you have now, which is the DGT boards, there were wall boys. And I was a wall boy for some of Fischer's games, which was just great. I'd sit five away and and be sitting there and watching the drama and all that. And I remember some of the games that I watched. That was great fun.
And did you know a guy named became a good friend of mine, Steve Brandwine?
Oh, of course I did.
Yes, and he was was it the Flea House?
He was the Flea House, and then he also was a big player at Chess City in the Game Room. He hung out there a lot.
Right.
Just an amazing character and a very, very strong chess player. Despite the fact he was very self-effacing, I can't play and blah blah blah. Yeah. He was, and he could hold his own with the grandmaster, especially speed chess. He's good, and he was a really smart, one of the most well-read people I've ever met in my life.
That's exactly the Steve that I knew. It was all he's always leaving the Mechanics Institute library with books in his arm and under his arm, and it was like any topic that and what Steve liked to do was argue about something. So if you had any topic that you thought differently than him, there was a lively conversation that would follow, and it wasn't necessarily about chess, but he was also before we chess base. I could ask Steve about a tournament or who played what and where, and then he would say, "Oh, that was Brown in Buenos Aires in 19 whatever," and it was, his memory was amazing.
Yes,
and, he was quite the resource, quite the good friend, and I'm not alone in saying that. But he has told me a little bit. But as you say, he was so self-effacing. He wouldn't let on about who he knew and what he had done and all that kind of stuff. And but one of my favorite conversations was with someone else about Steve, and they said that he had that Fischer had come to San Francisco and he had played blitz with Steve, and he was at one point he just said, "Who is this guy?"
He was good. I saw him in the U.S. Open in Boston, 1964, and he was on the top boards for the entire tournament. And people are going, "Who is this guy?" Same thing. Who the hell is this guy?
Right.
But I think he just didn't like the pressure of tournament chess.
Oh, he had no ambition either.
Yeah.
Not only was he self-effacient, but he didn't think it was important to him, and to become as good as he could be as a chess player.
Yeah. He was a big loss as a person, not just a chess player.
Yes. Yeah. And like I say, it could be French romantic literature, and it didn't matter what topic it was. He had an opinion about it. He had read it. And so, anyways, I don't want to get sidetracked by Steve because I want to get you back to like winning the Marshall Chess Club when you're that young, 22. You're now a young adult. You're beating someone with stature like George Kramer. And so what did you think about your career prospects at that time?
Well, I think that what happened was that I was supposed to graduate Columbia in 1972, but I did not because I was probably smoking too much dope at that point. But I was just not interested. I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. I had no
He
idea.
wasn't.
And then Fisher played in 72, and all of a sudden, it's not that I was a hot commodity. If you were a chess player, all of a sudden things were opening up, and Shelby Lyman opened up the Shelby Lyman Chess Institute.
Yeah.
George Kane started teaching, Frank Thornley, myself, Bruce Pandolfini, and it was just all of a sudden, we were a bunch of bums and we can make money.
Right.
So I became a chess professional, which was not just playing. Obviously, you don't make any money playing. And that went on from 72 to maybe the late 70s or something. But in 70, by the time 73 happened, I think I was starting to get better. And I was thinking about this today. Might have been because I was just sitting there for 5 hours a day watching the World Championship. And you're sitting and looking at two of the best players of all time, and you're not playing over the moves and finishing in 5 minutes. You're sitting there really trying to understand it. And I think I wasn't even aware of it. I think I started to get better. And in 73, I sort of took this jump. It was like suddenly I was a 2350 player and I was a contender, and George Kane and Andy Soltis and all these other people were in the Marshall Chess Club Championship, which I won. And then the match you're referring to, Jim, was basically again televised. It was Shelby Lyman trying to get a chess public again on WNET. So I won that match, and then in 75 I won the Marshall again, and which was all fine. And then I just sort of went along. I was teaching a lot. I was writing, but in 74. I think I started getting much better. I suddenly became an IM. I started to win tournaments. I played in one of my favorite things was the World Student Olympics, which we had a team that was probably ranked 20th that we had, but we were all young and nobody knew we were actually getting good very fast. And I scored 75%. I beat Sachs and Balashov on back-to-back. So I was starting to get better. In 75, I made another norm in Birmingham with a very strong field, Tony Miles, all these other people. And then in 76, I won my title in Reykjavik. And then kind of slowed down at that point. And in 78, I did make my one GM norm in a Goichberg tournament. And I still remember, it was like I won the last game. I had to win the last game. And I walked over, I handed my score sheet to Goichberg, and he just looked at me and said, "I can't believe you won." I was, Bill.
Yeah. Thanks for the
Not the right thing. Congratulations is what you're supposed to be saying.
Right. Good job.
It's just give me a break. But
I think all your life. I can't believe you won.
But I think what happened at that point is I've said this to people. I started to get hungry. I was like, it's now 6 or 7 years after Fisher Spassky. I'm only teaching rich people now. The big craze is over. And those are dwindling away because, they're all learning that they're not going to become great chess players. At least the kids are. So I said, what the hell am I going to do at this point? I can't do this for the rest of my life. Very good decision. And maybe the kind of thing that, a chess player does. I just looked at all the possibilities and I said, people seem to be talking about these things called computers. So I went to Columbia and I said, I'd like to, start up again. And they said, well, you lose X number of credits because you're just doing, you've not been around, you haven't been, studying. And I took the last 32 credits all in computer science and math and everything else. And then from then on, I just started to get job after job after job, and became kind of, a VP and a manager of like $25 million projects and all that. Afterwards I was sitting there going, how did I do that? I didn't know it. I didn't know the business. I had no idea really. But I think it was the chess skills that came through. This as well as I do. I mean, it's normal for us to be in a situation where you don't have the answers. Everybody thinks you calculate everything, and you and I know that's a joke. Right. At some point, it's your skill and what you've learned over time, and you suddenly you're in a situation you've never been in before, but you make kind of an educated guess. You do some calculation, but it's more a feel for the whole thing.
Intuition based, and
that's what, and that translated into business. Once I knew what the moves were of that game, I was able to make decisions, because the other thing is we're very used to making decisions, right? You don't, you know, a lot of people, they're terrified. They'll sit there, I have to know everything. Well, guess what? You're not going to know everything. And you have to, at some point, trust your intuition. And I used to walk around saying, you know, all these people be in panics. They don't want to make a choice. I said, look, what's the worst that can happen? They'll fire us. What the hell? But it was the skill sets, I think, of a chess player to be able to make a decision and under time pressure, because you had to, you know, as again,
Always, right.
And people are not used to that. They haven't been trained to do that. So everybody knew the business better. People knew the business better than I did. They knew the technology better than I did. They knew all that other stuff. But I was able to kind of blend the whole thing and make decisions.
You know, I really want to just emphasize that point, is because it's so true in my life too. You know, I got started because of the Fischer-Spassky match. I played my first rated game in 1972, and I got better fairly quickly. But when I graduated from college, I ended up moving to California. I was in New England before that to get work. And, you know, the only job when I got hired, and I was doing a job that was mindless, and I could play chess and to keep my mind active. But the only job that was hiring was in computer science and computer department. And, you know, I wasn't sure how to spell computer. Is it E-R, O-R? You know, but I passed the test. And how could I have passed that test? Well, partly was I always loved doing symbolic logic problems. And I kind of approached it like that.
Right.
But it was the chess skills that I had that allowed me to just not be intimidated by this and just do the best I could. And they hired me. And from that point on, you know, I kept getting promoted because I think it was, and I hadn't really thought about it, but I think it was that decision-making skill set that I had learned through chess, as you're talking about. I think how important that was in my career, because, you know, everybody else was losing their heads when the systems were down.
Right.
And we had to get them back up, or, you know, of course, you know, but we just, I just was cool. I just knew that, you know, we're gonna figure out why it crashed. But the main thing is to get it restored and operating as quickly as possible. And, you know, just being able to, it's like time pressure doubled, you know, but you're just not as rattled as everyone else is around you. And that helps. That helped a lot.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
Yeah, and support, and when there are outages going on, that's, I think, where the logic kind of, you know, comes in very fast, because you sit there and go, okay, so what changed? Right, this thing has been running for like 30 days, no problem. What changed? And you know, was there a strange trade? Was there this? Did somebody do a release last night? By the way,
exactly. Back it out.
Get the hell out of there, right? But you don't sit there and get something's been running great for 2 years and suddenly it just breaks.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen. But that's, I think, the kind of thing that we intuitively know.
Right.
And you just hit it with logic. And everybody else is panicking.
Exactly. And that is one of the many life lessons that chess teaches you. When I just say, when you teach a child chess, you teach them for a lifetime. These things, like when they're young, the confidence they get because they think they must be smart to play chess. And you and I know that's not true, but they think it. And so that confidence is immediately transferable back into the classroom. And then as an adult, you know, we're applying the lessons that we knew from chess to real life situations in business, and we're getting compensated for it. You know, it was like mind-numbing.
Money. Do you know Norman Weinstein? Do you know of him?
I did not know. I only know of him. Yes.
So he and I were like battling all the time for with Andy Soltis and all that when we were juniors and all the way through. I ran into him after a very long hiatus, and he was at Bankers Trust, which I ended up also working at. Norman basically got a job there, knew absolutely nothing, I think, about business. I have no idea, but he became one of the stellar foreign exchange traders in the world. I mean, I'm talking serious. I mean, he made them a lot of money, Bankers Trust, and wow. He also thinks it's the chess skills that made him do that. And he, I mean, to the point where what they did is they said, this guy is so good. They started a whole new business. They say to people like you and me, well, not like you and me, people with a lot of money, saying, okay, you give us $1 million, and whatever Norman does in his portfolio, he'll do for you, and they will charge you a fee. The guy, I mean, and he's also talking about self-effacing. Norman's another one. It's like, anytime he just doesn't think he's that good. He didn't think he was that good at chess, except he was like an IM and made at least, 1 or 2 GM norms, didn't quite get the title. He won international tournaments. The guy was very, very good, but he was like, oh, I'm not so good, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But anyway, the point is, someone else in the business world does very, very well. And deep down, it has to do with those chess skills to just analyze a very complex situation.
And a lot of those commodity traders started looking for chess players at some point. They started to hire and going out and looking for people. And I know, like Nick DeFermian.
And Ron Henley, I think, did extremely well.
Right. And, and I think, once the businesses kind of caught on, hey, these grandmasters, they're not just, chess players. Their thought process seems to work, especially in commodity trading and things like that.
Yep. And technology, very much so.
And very much so in technology. Like I said, I didn't know how to spell computer properly. And it was like not very, very few years later that I was in charge of things that were, if there was an outage, the pressure was intense. Because the amount of money that was involved, every minute it was down. I had vice presidents knocking on my door saying, do you know how much money we're losing every minute? And I was saying, is my time better spent solving the problem or talking to you?
Stop yelling at me, guys. I need to think.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But, you also had to have some gumption to be able to stand up and tell these guys who are, they would take macho male to the extreme. And that's what these guys were like in the brokerage industry anyways, that they were about intimidation. And you just, let me solve the problem. And that was my chess background. There's a problem here. Let me solve it. And if you're in my way, get out of my way, because I will solve it. And pretty quickly, they would give me the space I needed. And if I told them to do something, they would do it. And it was one of those things that was a natural outcome from my chess training, my logic training as well, because I loved symbolic logic. And that would have been my major if my college had offered it, but they didn't. So I think that these skills and chess helps train you in ways. I think math and mathematics and music also does both the creative and the discipline parts that you need. But chess is such an underexploited way to teach these skill sets to children.
I agree.
And it's happening more now than it ever has in the past. Like when you and I were growing up, gosh, it's kind of remarkable that your dad and you found the martial club. Just walking around.
And dumb luck, actually.
Right.
Not dumb, but you know what I mean. It's serendipity. He easily could have walked the other way on that street, and we never would have found the chess club.
Right.
So it's nice. So do you want to hear? Should we talk more about the Marshall currently, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think because that was just you were helping me do walks down memory lane. But let's talk about what, first off, especially interesting to me is the effects of the pandemic, because the Marshall is something I visited at most times that I go to New York, which used to be every year. But then when the pandemic hit, people just couldn't travel. Right. And so I would imagine the membership was affected. You would have the locals maybe, but still, had to wear masks, and maybe you had to shut down at some point. I know the mechanics did. And so it must have been a real difficult thing to overcome. Fortunately, you didn't have to pay rent, but it was still a struggle, I'm sure, in many ways. I want you to talk a little bit about that and how you've come out of it and what you're doing now.
It's kind of interesting because I think I rejoined and I became on the board. I got on the board in 2019. I retired in 2015. You have to be a a member of the club for 2 straight years before you can run for the board. I did that. I ran for the board. I got on the board. And then position opened up to be in charge of the tournament committee, which is one of the, there are really two ways that the marshal makes money. One is the membership dues, and the other is tournaments, whatever proceeds we get. So, you know, entry fees minus prizes minus staff, and whatever's left over is profit.
Right.
When the pandemic hit, and I guess, or everybody started to become aware of it in March of 2020, the president at the time, Noah Chasen, interestingly enough, he brought up very quickly, I think we need to shut the club down and not let anybody in. And I was just amazed because I have to give him a lot of credit for having the vision to realize that this was a non-starter to stay open. It was just much too dangerous.
Right.
So the board unanimously voted and said that's it. And then immediately we all were sitting there going, well, how do we stay in business? I mean, how do we even pay our rent or whatever? Because there is rent that's paid to the Marshall Chess Club, to the 23 West 10th Street Association.
I see. Yes.
So, and also the decision was made to stop the clock. So if we basically closed down the brick and mortar, there was no, why would I charge, how could I charge you your membership dues? What are you paying for?
Right.
So now we're down to like almost nothing. The expenses are still there. And I just kind of looked around and I said, you know, I think we have to do something about go into online chess. And I met with tremendous resistance. You know, there's cheating. You know, so this is a whole other topic, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
First time I learned about what that was all about, and it took a lot of work. I spoke to the U.S. Chess. I actually spoke to. I had some emails with Ken Regan.
Yeah.
Just spoke to various people, going, you know, what do I do? And I learned a tremendous amount about what was going on with computers, and, you know, trying to detect cheaters with computers. I gotta say, just a sidebar. To me, this is the greatest jujitsu of all time. So you basically, people are cheating using computers, and what you do is you use computers to figure out whether your pattern is becoming very computer-like. That's brilliant. It really is. So, you know, and people are saying, well, what are you going to do? Me? What am I going to do about cheating? I said, absolutely nothing. I'm going to get on a platform which is dealing with it, and I'm going to go along for the ride. You know, so if chess.com can't deal with it, can't solve the problem, neither can I. I'm not going to build. We learned this from our technology thing. You don't build
Reinvent the wheel,
right? Just I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. These guys are. So we did. We started, you know, we had online, you know, we did the whole thing with the Zoom, you know, 1 or 2 cameras and all that. And we didn't make a lot of money, Jim, but, you know, and we probably made 10 to 25% of what we used to make.
Yeah.
But still with no membership dues coming in. And this went on for like a year and a half, 2 years. And then, I'm sorry, and then we finally decided to reopen. The mandate was you must be vaccinated. You must prove you're vaccinated. I think initially it was including masks, but that sort of weakened once the vaccination started to look good, look like they were effective. And then at some point we said on high level, we're almost a members only club. Vaccinated members can come and play in our tournaments. We very slowly started to open up over the board play again. And now we're actually back to a full schedule. And I also, just as a sidebar, I was very, very much in contact with the mechanics. I've been working with Paul Whitehead and Abel Talamantes.
I thought Abel did a fantastic job in keeping the members playing online.
Absolutely.
Especially. And Paul's a real chess character. I really like Paul. But Abel did a fantastic job along with Judith. Sorry. They kept, like, the players that would show up for what we call the Tuesday night marathon, and you know, they just moved it online. So you kept the players, the community alive. I was so proud of
you had a Twitch stream also, which I used to watch. After a while, I started to watch with it was the Nick and Paul show.
Yeah.
And that was great. And what happened is I spent a lot of time talking to those guys, and we came up with a reciprocity agreement, which was that if you're a member of the mechanics, you're a member of the marshal. So it meant that, if a non-member had to pay $5 or $10 extra, you didn't have to do it. And that was both for online, or if you got on a plane and you came to the Marshall Chess Club and said, I want to play, I couldn't say you're not a member. You're a member, and you come in at member price.
That's community.
And it went both ways, right?
Yes.
You got the two oldest chess clubs in the country who are basically saying, mi casa, su casa.
Right, right. That's
I
good.
think it's a very nice thing.
I do too.
And I have a lot of respect for, Paul and Nick and all Abel and all those people. I think the mechanics is a great place to play chess. And someday I want to get out there and I don't know about the marathon, maybe have a speed tournament or something.
Yeah. But if you do, your money's no good out here. We'll take you around. We'll show you a good time.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's, my feeling is that, I came back, I had to deal with the pandemic. I've helped, which is what I said. You have to give a little speech about when you ask people to vote for you. And I said, look, chess has given me a tremendous amount. All I want to do is give something back. And I kind of got lucky. They got lucky because I was in charge of the tournaments, and I was able to get us to the point where we could establish an online presence and then come out of it. I think the Marshall's a great place. I really, really love it. I think
you reminded me. I think I have. Let me just see. There we go. That's what the Marshall looks like according to this photo. Is that Frank Marshall in the background? The bust of him?
It's his bust.
Yeah.
It's been there forever.
Yeah. And it's actually the home that he lived in, that the Marshall.
Yep. They lived on I think Frank, Carrie, and Frank Jr. lived, I don't know what floor. They lived up above. Mrs. Marshall would come down every once in a while, and we were the juniors, and her famous thing was, don't bang the pieces. The kids would be banging away, right?
Yeah.
But there's a very little known thing, which I just learned because I go to Chess Cafe, and Alexi Root is there. And she was talking to me about the women's U.S. Women's Championship. I didn't know this. The first from late 1930s to maybe about 10 years or more, the U.S. Women's Championship was held at the Marshall Chess Club, and that's because of Carrie Marshall, which is great.
And shout out to Dr. Alexi Root. She wrote a great book about the American U.S. Women's Championship.
Yeah,
very instructive to me.
Yeah, she's a very smart lady, and she does a great job. I mean, I did a tiny little bit to help her research. Actually, interestingly enough, she said, can you find some of the games from those early U.S. Women's Championships? Because, I mean, as well as I do, all those games, nothing is in computers anymore. They're not in databases. So, she was hoping I could find archives in the Marshall somewhere, but I couldn't. But I helped her a little bit, very little.
Well, still, you did what you could, because record keeping at the time was kind of hit or miss.
Right. I also mentioned to you earlier that I'm a VP and a board of and a governor on the board, but I'm also the president of the Marshall Chess Foundation, which is a different.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about that, because that was interesting to me.
Yeah, so basically the foundation is like any foundation. It's a 501c3. We accept donations, and we support programs. So some chess in the schools. I'm not Chess in the Schools, the organization, but obviously we try to do that, particularly in underprivileged areas. We supply equipment to prisons. We've sent some to Africa. Actually, you were trying to help me at some point with that, and I know you do it also.
Yes.
And we're kind of feeling our oats at this point to to just start to become on the radar of people that we're doing good things, and we would like your donations, tax free, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing you might find interesting is that in 2008. Joan Fisher, Bobby's sister, I don't know if you heard of this, gave us 15 boxes full of chess memorabilia. I'm sorry, Bobby Fischer memorabilia. So there are photos. Stop this for a second. Photos, game scores, and the game scores are carbon copies because that's all anybody had.
That's what we had, yeah.
And that's written in Bobby Fischer's hand. So I've got about 150 games like that, including the game of the century.
Wow.
Lots of photos, correspondence between Bobby and his mother, his sister, among the three of them, postcards to Jack, all of these, which we call the Fischer Archive. I'm actually trying to get the World Chess Hall of Fame to consider seriously buying this. Because my argument is it's 501c3 paying a 501c3. You get the archives, I get to do good. The foundation gets to do good for with the proceeds. So we're trying to do that. The book I was talking about earlier, the Bobby Fischer's Games of Chess. This is not my 60 memorable games. I've got handwritten galleys by Bobby, and the galleys that were sent back to him by. Who's the publisher? Same publisher as 60 Memorable Games. Macmillan, maybe? Not sure.
I'm not sure either. Of course, my copy is brutally manhandled.
Yes. So anyway, it's we have a fair amount of money actually that came from Mona Karff. We finance the Marshall Chess Club Championship every year with her money, his money. It's called the Edward Lasker Memorial, and the idea is that if the prize fund is $5,000, the foundation gives the club the $5,000 and to pay the prizes, and all the entry fees go to the Marshall Chess Club. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Right.
And she wants us to keep Mona. She's not alive anymore, but Mona Karff, a 7-time U.S. women's chess champion, by the way.
I just heard about her.
Yeah, and her thing was you have to have one tournament a year, and you have to honor Edward Lasker. So we do. So it's kind of nice. It's very hard to completely separate us, but legally we are complete. We're distinct.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a very interesting aspect of what you're doing. And I'm really as you said earlier, chess meant so much to me growing up. And, during the teenage angst years, I had people that I never knew, my grandfathers. But there are people my grandfather's age who were, talking to me like I was an important little person. And I think that all of that intergenerational thing made a big difference to me growing up. And now I'm at a point of giving back. And it sounds like we're at the same stage in our lives now. And all these things these activities that the foundation is doing, they're just keep up the good work, Sal. I'm really proud of what you're accomplishing now.
Thank you, Jim. I see what you're doing, and I think it's great.
Thank you. Okay. Is there any question? I have to end, but is there any question that I've forgotten to ask you? I should have asked you about anything you want to tell the viewers about the Marshall? It's in the village. It's not hard to find.
It's in an old townhouse. We find out we as the board, we hear all the time about it's endless maintenance. It's an old building.
Oh yes,
it's a very old building. So there's the pipes are bursting every once in a while. We're trying to.
It's silly me saying you don't have any expenses because you own the house. Yes,
exactly. One other tidbit: it's like maybe next time you come to New York City, we should do something. So I found out that there's a steakhouse. I very rarely eat steak, but anyway. There's a steakhouse in the 38th Street near Macy's called Keen's Steakhouse. It's famous for like pipes being stuck in the ceiling. It apparently is the birthplace of the Marshall Chess Club. Frank Marshall and some of his rich cronies used to sit there and play chess. And somewhere in there is when some of these rich guys said, "Frank, we're going to buy you a building," and that's what they did. That was the beginning of the Marshall Chess Club. So I've always wanted to go to Keen's Steakhouse and just sort of absorb the atmosphere.
Yeah, and give a little toast.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Sal. I'm going to take you backstage and do my outro. But what a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Jim. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay, that was Sal Matera, and this has been episode 65 of the Chess Files. The answers are out there. So tune in to this. You can find this on the EAT Foundation YouTube channel. Just do a search on the EAT Foundation, and you'll find many videos just like this one, but not all of them quite as good. But I'm a constant, so you got that going for you. But in any case, keep playing chess and try wherever you are to build a chess community, wherever you are. Doesn't matter what language you speak, what country you're from. Chess communities can be built anywhere. Thank you for joining.